Hey guys, it's less than 24 hours away until I draw the winner of this brand new Nike Stephen Curry jersey to Best Mate members over on the Patreon. If you haven't checked it out already and consider becoming a member, please do so. I'll leave the link in the description. Coming up on this episode, a recap of Golden State's preseason, a look ahead to opening night against the Lakers in a couple of days and what the starting lineup and rotation could look like, and a potential trade the Warriors might already need to be considering given their expected role for Al Horford. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Hope everyone's had a good weekend or having a good weekend, depending on where you are and when you're listening to this. It's Monday morning here for me in Australia. I've woken up to Kevin Durant extending with the Houston Rockets on a 2-year, $90 million deal. Good deal for both parties, I think. I think gives Houston a little bit more room, a little bit more flexibility for them to go out and obviously do what they need to do in terms of potentially re-signing Tari Eason. We've got not long now until the deadline for that. Otherwise, he becomes a restricted free agent. And, of course, next offseason, they'll have Amen Thompson extension eligible as well, and we assume he's probably going to get a max given the trajectory of his career. It does make me wonder from a Warriors standpoint, would it have been nice if Jimmy Butler back in February was willing to take a little bit less like KD now has and potentially got 2 years 90 as well, rather than the 2 years 111 that the Warriors ultimately gave Jimmy Butler upon his arrival to Golden State? Would have been nice, would have probably allowed the Warriors to have a little bit more wiggle room in terms of the offseason and what they did, and maybe even provided the opportunity to get their business settled and wrapped up far earlier than what we saw, obviously, with stuff not getting officially done until after media day. Obviously, you'd have a little bit more room under the second apron. Seth Curry could still be on the roster rather than having to obviously waive him and then bring him back next month. We saw the Warriors do that yesterday, waiving Seth and also LJ Cryer, which the Cryer one, a little bit of a surprise maybe. I'm not shocked, but it's the final two-way contract at the end of the day. But I think a lot of us Warrior fans probably would have looked at that and thought that LJ Cryer could have got a spot over Jackson Rowe with a bit more upside and his impressive shot making during preseason. But it is what it is. But going back to the Butler contract, I think the Warriors would do it 100 times out of 100 if they had a chance to do that over, based simply on the on-court impact that Jimmy Butler has had. So it's not a disaster for the Warriors by any means. Would it have been nice if he took $20 million less than what he ultimately did? Probably. But fortunately for the Rockets, they've been able to do that with KD and now have him locked in. It's going to be fascinating to see how they sort of manage their payroll moving forward here after obviously extending Şengün as well last season, just giving a not a max extension, a big extension to Jabari Smith Jr. as well earlier in the offseason. But let's talk Warriors, who finished up their preseason with their final game against the Clippers on Friday, a 106-103 defeat at Chase Center. It was a little bit disappointing, it must be said, given the Clippers were without essentially almost all of their rotation. Now, they did have some guys, Bradley Beal, Ivica Zubac, John Collins, I think, all played kind of in the first half. They had some guys out there in the first half, but the second half was basically a complete third string end of bench unit for the LA Clippers, and they still managed to get the win. So a little bit disappointing, it must be said. And I think the preseason as a whole for the Warriors was a little bit underwhelming, even though you look at it and say, well, they won 3 of their 5 games. It's not horrific. But some of the individual form which we're looking at across this preseason was not ideal. I suppose the big positives is to say that Steph and Jimmy looked themselves. Steph was excellent in the last couple of games against the Trailblazers and the Clippers, really got going, kind of tuning up for obviously Tuesday night's regular season opener against the Lakers. Jimmy was good for his first couple of games, then kind of had the ankle issue at the end and missed the last 3 games. Obviously, the Warriors need Steph Curry to be Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler to be Jimmy Butler in order to make a really deep run this season. And I suppose, first of all, you just want to see those guys be the superstar players that they are. And I think we saw enough of that in preseason to suggest that there's no cliff coming for those guys where they're going to drastically be worse than what they have in previous seasons. So that's good to see. But beyond that, I'm kind of looking at it, I'm like, Steph was good, Jimmy was good, then missed his games. Moody was obviously excellent in the preseason opener, dating back a couple of weeks against the Lakers, but then he got injured. And now he's a confirmed out Steve Kerr confirmed that today. Moses Moody's out for opening night against the Lakers with that calf injury. Will Richard, obviously very impressive and one of the big takeaways. Horford had a great opener, it must be said, great preseason opener, and then he was fine. I'm still happy enough with Al Horford. I think he's going to have huge impact on the Warriors. Kuminga was different. Kuminga was very different. We've spoken a lot about that, and then he obviously missed Friday's game as well with an ankle injury. Pods had one great game against the Lakers when he went for 23, 5 and 8. Outside of that, not much. And then the rest of it was fairly underwhelming, it must be said. Let me know if you had any other big takeaways from the preseason, but it felt like even though they technically had a winning record, a couple of those games were coming back in the second halves when other teams are playing again their third string lineups and a bench garbage time guys. So yeah, it wasn't great. Albeit I'm still fairly optimistic that the Warriors can get the job done on opening night against the Lakers. I think they've come into favoritism for that. So Moses is out. Jimmy and JK are going to be listed as questionable by the sound of it. Makes for a very interesting starting lineup discussion and rotation discussion for Steve Kerr and for us, obviously, to talk about. The Lakers themselves are missing LeBron James. They've basically confirmed their starting five, where they're going to be starting Luka, Austin Reeves, Gabe Vincent, Rui Hachimura, and DeAndre Ayton. What I'll say about that is that looks like it can be exploited quite significantly defensively. That does not look like a great starting lineup from a defensive side of things. So I think the Warriors can really try and get a hot start offensively in this game, particularly with the Lakers already having some defensive concerns, losing Dorian Finney-Smith in the offseason, and if Jared Vanderbilt, who's probably their best defender, is coming off the bench. I don't know. I feel like this could, particularly with Moses probably would have been the best answer, or the first answer, I suppose, to trying to limit Luka Doncic in any kind of way. So feels like this could be an offensive-minded game. Feels like we could see some scoring in this game with the defensive concerns, perhaps particularly for the Lakers, just in what their roster looks like, and with Moody being out for the Warriors. And we know Steve Kerr had kind of slated him as a primary perimeter defender for the Warriors, and very disappointing that he's now going to be out. So what do we think of the starting lineup? Let me know in the comments. What's it going to look like? Feels like we've got 4 starters locked in, assuming Jimmy Butler is fit and healthy to go, which we think is going to be the case. So it's going to be Steph and Pods in the backcourt, and we know Jimmy and Draymond are going to be there as well. Now, the interesting thing to this is Steve also came out before Friday's game against the Clippers and said that the plan for Al Horford is for him to play about 20 minutes a game, which is perhaps a little bit lower than I thought he would. Now, I'd prefer to be on the side of caution, I suppose, and manage his minutes during the regular season and have him ready to go for the playoffs. Obviously, that's the priority. Would you prefer Al Horford's minutes per game be up a little bit but rest more, or would you rather his minutes be down and potentially play in more games? Maybe it's the latter, so I can also understand that perspective of it. We know he's not going to play in back-to-backs necessarily, but maybe if you're limiting to 20 minutes a game, he can play 65 games rather than 55 games or something like that. Obviously, things can change with injuries and stuff like that during the regular season. But we saw Friday night against the Clippers, Al Horford played, I think, 19 minutes and 39 seconds in that game. So there's a clear plan for the Warriors on Al Horford playing 20 minutes a game. How they get to that 20 minutes is going to be fascinating, because Steve said it's very, very difficult to start a guy, to close a guy, and to limit him to 20 minutes, because if that's the case, if he's playing the first 5 minutes and the last 5 minutes, suddenly for the other 38 minutes of the game, he can only play 10 minutes, and you're sitting him for the majority of the middle of the game. So that's going to be really interesting to me to see how they get to his 20 minutes and how they manage that. And it sounds to me as if Steve doesn't want to start Al Horford. He's said it repeatedly. He's said it now that, hey, if we want to limit him to 20 minutes, it's very difficult to do so if we're also starting and closing with him. So what do the Warriors do then in terms of their starting lineup? Because I think a lot of us just assumed that Al Horford was going to come in and be the starting center, and he has been the starting center for the final few preseason games. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the case. Sounds like the Warriors are going to be fluid with this kind of stuff as the season progresses, depending on the opponent, depending on how guys are feeling from night to night, depending on the injury issues. Of course, I have absolutely no doubt that if Moses Moody was available for this game, Steve Kerr would be going right to the small ball lineup that we saw at the end of last season and for the preseason opener against the Lakers. I've absolutely no doubt about that, particularly when the Lakers are starting fairly small themselves. You've got Gabe Vincent, a small guard, in the LeBron James spot. That should be LeBron James. He's out injured. Instead, it's a small guard in Gabe Vincent, who's been shooting the crap out of the ball in preseason, being excellent. But from a size and physical standpoint, that's completely different, obviously, to LeBron James. So it's going to be really interesting to me to see what Steve does, because is there another small ball lineup you can put out there that makes some sense and that you can get away with against the Lakers, which I think you can. So I'd actually be surprised at this point if Al Horford starts on Tuesday night against the Lakers. I think he might come off the bench. So what are the other options then with Moody out? Again, if Moody was available, he's going to that small ball lineup, no doubt about it. What's the alternative? Who's in there for Moody instead then? Interesting, Nick Friedel, now of The Athletic, covering the Warriors, mentioned Jonathan Kuminga as a potential starter for opening night. This would be incredible, because we've heard all the talk about Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, Jonathan Kuminga not fitting together when they're on the floor. Steve Kerr has said that repeatedly. And yet we're going to have a situation here where those guys have not started a game together in preseason. And yet Nick Friedel is telling us there's a chance they could start together on opening night against the Lakers. For what it's worth, I think it makes some sense. Again, I think you can go smaller against the Lakers. We've seen the way Jonathan Kuminga has been rebounding in majority of the preseason games that he played in. Was at a really strong level. They're obviously going to need to be an excellent team rebounding unit out there without, well, in fact, the Warriors, aside from Trace Jackson-Davis, who's probably going to be out of the rotation altogether, the Warriors don't really have a great individual rebounder. They're always going to have to do it from a team rebounding perspective. So I think the Kuminga thing makes a little bit of sense, but at the same time, it's like, hang on, Steve, you've told us these three guys can't play together. Now opening night, after not seeing any preseason action together, really, you're going to do it. You're going to put those three out there. It's a bit of a risk. It might be a risk worth taking, though, particularly if you're like, well, Al Horford, we kind of probably want him to close. We also want to limit him to 20 minutes. What's the other option? Kuminga might be your best bet. Otherwise, you're going even smaller with a guy like Buddy Hield, potentially. I just think that's too small. I think, yes, there's not much difference in size between Buddy Hield and Moses Moody necessarily, but I feel like Moses just generally can play bigger than Buddy Hield can. Like if he gets switched onto Rui Hachimura, for example, then I think like Moody's going to be able to hold up in like a post matchup against Rui Hachimura much better than like Buddy Hield is, for example. So it feels to me like that you're going really small with a guy like Buddy Hield. Will Richard started the last two preseason games. I think he's going to be in the rotation. I think there's no, particularly with this Moody injury, I think Will Richard will definitely be in the rotation. Can he start? I don't think so. I don't think Will Richard's starting on opening night against the Lakers in his debut game. Again, nationally televised game against the Los Angeles Lakers at Crypto.com Arena. Eyes of the world on you. Think Steve might just bring him off the bench for that one. I don't think he's necessarily starting. And again, I think that's also too small. So what are the other options? Okay, I suppose Quentin Post. You could start Quentin Post. Do you go to Trace Jackson-Davis? If you go to TJD, Jimmy, Draymond, TJD, that's not enough spacing. You're not going to do that. Quentin Post? Maybe, but I doubt it. Quentin Post's preseason was really interesting to me because he scored the second most points behind Steph of any Warrior player in preseason. And I think he also led the Warriors in plus minus in preseason. And so from those numbers, you think, oh yeah, like he was decent. I don't think so. I think he was like, I was actually a little bit disappointed because I know he can shoot the ball. I know he can fire away from distance and make them at a high rate. Great. We know he can do that. I would also like to see him improve his defensive and rebounding side of his game. And I don't think we saw that enough, at least in preseason or consistently enough. So I don't think Quentin Post is necessarily going to get the start. TJD obviously doesn't allow enough spacing. Do the Warriors have any other forward options beyond Kuminga? They're not starting Guy Santos. Like Kuminga is probably the answer to me if you've decided we're not starting Horford. And I think this opens up a far greater debate on what the Warriors need for this roster moving forward, and a move that they should potentially look at making either early in the season or at least by mid-season, particularly once Kuminga becomes trade eligible and you get a lot more flexibility in terms of what you can do. If Al Horford's only playing 20 minutes a game during the regular season, can you actually fill the other 28 minutes effectively? Now, Draymond is going to play small ball 5 minutes. We know that. Is that 5, 10 a game? Let's say it's 8 a game. Well, that leaves 20 minutes. Are you happy enough for Quentin Post and or Trace Jackson Davis to eat up those 20 minutes for each game during the season, and then for Quentin Post to be probably a starter when Al Horford's out? That's interesting to me because I didn't love what I saw from Quentin Post during the preseason. And I thought Trace was actually okay at times. But again, his offensive limitations means there's a lot of lineups you just can't have him out there because there's a complete lack of spacing. So I think the Warriors, I went into preseason. I went into training camp preseason thinking that the Warriors are fine for the center position or the big man rotation. They don't need another option. Like Horford, Trace, QP, that's enough. But I also went in thinking that Horford might average like 25 minutes a game. He averaged 27.7 with the Celtics last season. So I thought, oh, well, even if you bring that down like 4 minutes, he's still playing 24, 25. And I know it's like going from 24, 25 down to 20 doesn't sound significant. But like if that's an extra 4 or 5 minutes you got to have Quentin Post on the floor, based on what we saw in preseason, I don't love that. I don't love that necessarily. I don't think I saw anything from Quentin or TJD to suggest they're more than backup guys. So if you're suddenly asking Quentin Post to play at least 20 minutes a game or around that and be a starter and play potentially 25, 30 minutes on nights when Al Horford's out, that's a bit of a concern to me. And I also look at it and say, well, Horford can play plenty of minutes at the 4. So I think there's an opportunity to go out there and fortify your front court rotation, get another center option or a guy that can play at the 4 or 5, another big body. I also think ideally, in an ideal world, it would probably be a proven starting caliber center that would allow you to say, you know what, Al, we're not going to do this push and pull of are you starting this game, you're coming off the bench and flipping it as the season progresses. You're our 6th man. You're our 6th man or 7th. You're playing 20 minutes a night off the bench. That's it. Okay, we're not asking you to come into a starting role. We've got another option here, which the Warriors don't currently have because, again, Quentin Post, Trace Jackson Davis, not really starting caliber centers right now on good quality playoff teams. Okay, just facts, must be said. So I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, do they need another center, right, to add to what they've got already? Or potentially, maybe TJD's in the trade, right, and you've still got 3 centers on your roster, but you're upgrading one of them. Because otherwise, I'm just a little bit concerned. I'm a little bit concerned about filling up those 28 minutes that Al Horford's not going to be on the floor each game. Not to mention the games he's going to be resting and not playing second nights of back-to-backs. What if TJD or Quentin Post go down with an injury as well? So this is the thing for me. I'd be looking at, if I'm the Warriors and I'm looking at my roster, I'd be prioritizing a center. And I'd also be I'd be looking at a good one, not just one like, oh, could you go and get Precious Achua, who was just waived by the Heat or whatever, and like he can play some 4-5. No, not Precious Achua, not a guy who's just going to be fighting to get into a 10 or 11 man rotation. I'm talking about a good quality starting center that you're probably going to have to give up stuff for. You're going to have to give up assets for. Who could that be? We know the Warriors at the start of the month were linked by Brett Siegel of Clutch Points in a report linking them to Bam Adebayo, right? Kendrick Perkins has come out and says he doesn't believe Bam Adebayo will be on the Heat by the end of the season. Is Bam Adebayo an option? Stevie and I discussed it last week. That's a guy you could plug in at center and say, okay, here's a guy, all-star caliber guy, great defender, can play 30, 35 minutes a game, can play alongside Al Horford. They could play together in the front court. Plenty of flexibility there. You're going to have to give up plenty of stuff for Bam Adebayo. It won't be able to happen until Jonathan Kuminga is trade eligible mid-season, unless you're willing to give up Draymond Green, which Stevie and I discussed last week as well. Is Bam an option, right? The other one I'm looking at the moment, Walker Kessler. Saw the Jazz game against Portland earlier this week, late last week, my time. Some of Walker Kessler's passing from the top of the key, I was like, whoa, well, the Warriors would like to look at this. He knocked down a three, his only three-point attempt. Now, I'm not a true believer in his three-point shot, especially not at this stage. But some of the passing, the dude had, was it like 14, 11, and 8 assists or something like that with a couple of blocks? And again, made his only three. If Walker Kessler's going to show that kind of passing ability and prove that, okay, he looks like not just a quality starting center, but a guy that could actually fit into what the Warriors try and do with their off-ball movement, their screening and stuff like that. Walker Kessler, again, he's a guy that if you're going to trade for him, you're going to need to have to pay him. Obviously, right now, on a rookie contract, it wouldn't be hard to match salaries and get Walker Kessler right now. Now, giving up what the Jazz would want, which I'm sure if he continues to play like he did in that final preseason game, the Jazz might want a couple of first-round picks. Does that take you? That probably takes you out of the Giannis sweepstakes. Do the Warriors want to do that? Probably not. But that's a guy I'm looking at and saying, well, not only is that a guy who could be a starting center, but he's also a starting center of the future for you, particularly if he's going to show that kind of passing ability on a pretty bad Jazz team. I don't know. They're the two I'm looking at right now. Bam Adebayo and Walker Kessler, and then other options are probably going to come up at some point. Lauri Markkanen obviously is kind of an option as well. I suppose if you've got Markkanen, then it allows, you can probably get away with playing Draymond as a small ball five a little bit more, maybe because you've actually got another 7-footer next to him, even though Markkanen doesn't generally play as a traditional 7-footer, we know. So obviously matching contracts with him is going to be impossible until it's going to be very, very difficult as is, let alone before January 15 and until Kuminga becomes trade eligible. So we know that can't happen. But right now, could they go out and get Walker Kessler? Like, we know he's not going to get an extension done with the Jazz here. I'm looking at that. I'm looking at that and saying, well, if Utah don't want to pay this guy, could the Warriors get involved? Now, do I have concerns with the spacing of a Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, Walker Kessler front court? Yes, I do. Absolutely. But if anything, we're just talking about buying time in the regular season and filling up the 28 minutes that Al Horford's not going to be on the floor. And again, do you want to give up a couple of first-round picks to do that? Maybe not, but also like Walker Kessler could be a starting center for you. There could also be an opportunity to start Al Horford at the 4 and Walker Kessler at the 5 and have Draymond coming off the bench. Like, Horford provides you with all this flexibility, but they're only limiting him to 20 minutes. So, I don't know. Just let me know if you're on YouTube watching this. Let me know in the comments. Should the Warriors be looking at another big man based on limiting Al Horford to 20 minutes and based on kind of the underwhelming nature of Quinton Post, I thought, in preseason? Or do you think the Warriors are just going to be more than comfortable in letting Quinton Post play 18 to 20 minutes a game and filling in as a starter potentially when Al Horford's, not there and he's resting, or, playing 25, 30 minutes off the bench when Al Horford's out resting? Don't know. Let me know. But it's going to be fascinating stuff. What would you do with the starting lineup? What would you do with the rotation ahead of opening night? Please let me know. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that'd be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POC252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. Golden State with Mates also on Instagram, TikTok. Please go check out the Patreon as well if you haven't already. We back after opening night for a live stream. Looking forward to that one. I'm fairly confident that the Warriors can get the win, but honestly, I'm just looking forward to basketball being back, as I'm sure many of you are as well. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.